At the peak of global fame, when stadiums are sold out and records are shattered, it is easy to assume that everything is perfect. But behind the flashing lights and synchronized choreography of the world's biggest music group, a quiet crisis was unfolding that almost ended their story forever. In 2018, while the world was watching BTS conquer charts, the members themselves were privately preparing to walk away from it all. Burnout, immense pressure, and the suffocating weight of expectations had pushed them to the absolute brink, making them question if the spotlight was worth their sanity. What happens when the very dream you fought for becomes a cage you desperately want to escape? How did a group of 7 young men who were on the verge of signing their own termination manage to find a way back to each other and change the course of pop culture history? The answers lie not in corporate strategies or marketing campaigns, but in a series of highly personal decisions, raw conversations, and unexpected moments that saved them from self-destruction. Number 7. The Tearful Confession, Jin. When BTS stood on the stage at the Mnet Asian Music Awards in Hong Kong in December 2018, the world saw a group at the absolute height of their power. They had just conquered the Billboard charts, completed a massive stadium tour, and established themselves as a global phenomenon unlike anything the music industry had seen in decades. Yet, as the trophy for Artist of the Year was handed to them, the atmosphere on stage shifted from celebration to raw, unfiltered emotion. The members were visibly shaken, weeping openly before a crowd of thousands and millions watching online. It was Jin who stepped forward to the microphone, his voice trembling, as he delivered a speech that would send shockwaves through the global music community. Instead of the typical public relations platitudes, he revealed a dark truth that had been hidden behind their perfect choreography and bright smiles. Earlier that year, the group had suffered a severe mental and emotional crisis to the point where they had seriously discussed disbanding. This confession did not just shock the fandom, it exposed the brutal reality of their rapid ascent to fame. The year 2018 had been a whirlwind of historic achievements, but behind the scenes, it was a pressure cooker of exhaustion and fear. The transition from struggling underdogs from a small agency to the shoulders carrying the weight of an entire industry's expectations had happened too fast. The schedule was relentless, leaving them with no time to process their new reality or care for their own well-being. Jin, as the oldest member of the group, was uniquely positioned to feel the gravity of this crisis. In K-pop culture, the role of the oldest member carries a distinct set of social expectations, often requiring them to act as a stabilizing pillar for the younger members. Throughout their career, Jin had chosen a path of lightheartedness, using humor and playfulness to ease the tension in high-stress environments. But behind that easygoing persona lay a deep sensitivity to the group's collective emotional state. In early 2018, as the group grappled with the terrifying scale of their success, the anxiety became overwhelming. The members felt as though they were riding a runaway train, unable to slow down or step off. The fear of failure, combined with the physical exhaustion of constant travel, performances, and public scrutiny, had brought them to a breaking point. It was during these intense private discussions that the option of walking away from the contract was seriously put on the table. The fact that they were even discussing disbandment at the very moment they were achieving their wildest dreams shows how severe the burnout was. For Jin, the decision to speak about this on one of the biggest stages in K-pop was a massive risk. The industry is notorious for maintaining a polished facade of perfection, where idols are expected to show only gratitude and happiness. By breaking this unwritten rule, Jin did something revolutionary. He humanized the group in a way that resonated far beyond the music. His tearful confession was a release valve for the immense pressure they had all been holding inside. It was an acknowledgement that they were not invincible machines, but young men who were struggling to breathe under the weight of their own success. By openly admitting their weakness, Jin allowed the group to heal. The speech acted as a catalyst for a deeper understanding between the members and their audience. It showed that their bond was not built on the pursuit of records or trophies, but on shared humanity and mutual support. Instead of tearing them apart, the honesty of that moment brought them closer together. It made them realize that the only way to survive the storm of global fame was to face it together, prioritizing their mental health and their brotherhood over the demands of the industry. Jin's vulnerability that night in Hong Kong was the first step towards redefining what success meant to BTS. It allowed them to let go of the pressure to be perfect and instead focus on staying together. This moment of extreme honesty reframed their entire trajectory, proving that sometimes admitting you want to give up is the very thing that gives you the strength to keep going. The aftermath of that historic night saw a profound shift in the inner workings of BTS. As the tears dried and the members returned to their dorms, the weight of Jin's public revelation began to settle. It was a moment of absolute vulnerability that could have backfired, exposing cracks in their armor that critics could exploit. Instead, it had the opposite effect. It initiated a period of intense reflection, not just for the members, but also for their management. Big Hit Entertainment was forced to confront the sustainability of the grueling system they had created. For K-pop agencies, the standard operating procedure had always been to maximize profit during a group's peak years, often at the cost of the artist's physical and mental health. However, the realization that their flagship group was on the verge of walking away prompted a complete reassessment of their management philosophy. Jin's words served as the catalyst for contract renegotiations that were unprecedented in the industry. Rather than signing standard, restrictive agreements, the members were able to secure terms that prioritized their longevity, creative freedom, and personal well-being. Jin's advocacy for a balanced life became a cornerstone of this new chapter. He began to speak openly about the importance of rest, asserting that unproductive time was not wasted time, but a necessary component of mental survival. This philosophy was gradually integrated into the group's schedule, allowing them to take structured breaks and step away from the spotlight when needed. The music they produced after this crisis also reflected a deeper level of introspection. The Love Yourself series, which had been conceived as a message of comfort to their audience, became a personal lifeline for the members. They began to write about their own doubts, their fear of the future, and the difficulty of loving oneself amidst external chaos. By sharing their personal struggles, they forged an even deeper connection with their fans, transforming the relationship from one of idolization to one of mutual support and shared experience. The cognitive dissonance of their existence in 2018 cannot be overstated. One day they were ordinary young men from South Korea, and the next they were standing at the United Nations General Assembly delivering speeches on global platforms. They were meeting heads of state and carrying the cultural diplomacy of an entire nation. The pressure was not merely about performing well on stage, it was about representing a country and an entire generation. Jin's public acknowledgement of their pain stripped away the diplomat veneer and reminded everyone that they were still human. In the K-pop industry, where mental health issues are often brushed under the rug, this was a watershed moment. It created a safe space where the members could openly discuss their limitations without fear of being labeled as weak or ungrateful. The relief of no longer having to pretend to be fine allowed them to rebuild their collective resolve. The threat of disbandment, which had hung over them like a dark cloud for months, was finally brought into the light. By naming their fear, they stripped it of its power. Jin's courage to vocalize the unspeakable changed the narrative from one of potential collapse to one of resilience and survival. It proved that their bond was strong enough to withstand the most intense scrutiny and the heaviest burdens. As they looked forward to the future, they did so with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that they were choosing to stay together not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Yet, while Jin's public confession in 2018 helped heal the wounds of their sudden global stardom, it was not the first time the group had faced the terrifying prospect of falling apart. To truly understand how close they came to never existing at all, we have to look back to their pre-debut days, when a critical decision by another member threatened to derail the group before their journey even began. Number 6, the packed bags, J-Hope. Before BTS could even set foot on a public stage, before the name of the group was known to anyone outside the walls of their tiny agency, they faced a quiet, devastating collapse. It happened in the cramped quarters of their pre-debut dorm, a place where dreams were cheap but survival was expensive. Among the trainees was Jung Ho-sok, known today to millions as J-Hope, a young man who had arrived in Seoul with a reputation as a highly talented street dancer from Gwangju. Yet the reality of trainee life at Big Hit Entertainment was far from glamorous. The agency was financially struggling, operating on a shoestring budget, and the pressure on the trainees was immense. The financial strain on the company was so severe that the trainees often had to practice in rooms with leaking ceilings and no air conditioning during the humid Seoul summers. Their daily lives were defined by a lack of basic necessities, sharing a single cramped bedroom with multiple other trainees and surviving on cheap convenience store meals. The uncertainty of whether Big Hit would even survive as a company was a constant topic of whispered conversations after the staff had gone home. For Ho-sok, the contrast between this bleak reality and his comfortable life in Gwangju became a source of constant mental torment. They practiced for 14 hours a day, slept in shifts, and lived under the constant threat of being cut from the lineup. During this era, the K-pop industry was dominated by the big three entertainment giants, who possessed the capital and influence to guarantee media exposure for their artists. Big Hit, by contrast, was a minor player on the verge of bankruptcy. For a trainee, this meant that even if they managed to debut, there was a very high probability that the group would disband within a year due to financial failure. The physical toll was matched by a profound psychological isolation. Trainees were cut off from their families and subjected to weekly evaluations that felt like public trials. For Ho-sok, who had already tasted local success as a prominent member of the street dance crew Neuron in Gwangju, the transition was jarring. In Gwangju, he was a respected dancer. In Seoul, he was just another face in a crowded room, working endless hours for a dream that had no guarantee of materializing. The constant pressure began to erode his confidence, leading him to question if he had made a mistake in leaving his hometown. One day, overwhelmed by this mounting anxiety, Ho-sok made a decision that would have altered the course of modern music history. He packed his bags, said his goodbyes, and resolved to return to Gwangju. The news of his departure hit the remaining trainees like a physical blow. The dorm, which was already filled with tension, became quiet and hollow. The departure of a member during the pre-debut phase is often the death knell for a rookie group, as it disrupts the chemistry and forces the agency to rethink the entire concept. The emotional impact was particularly severe on Jungkook, the youngest member of the group, who had developed a deep emotional attachment to Ho-sok. For a young teenager who had left his family behind in Busan, Ho-sok was more than just a fellow trainee. He was a parental figure, a mentor, and a source of emotional stability. The sight of the youngest member weeping openly reflected the deep sense of loss that threatened to shatter the fragile unity of the trainees. The sight of the youngest member weeping openly brought the gravity of the situation home for everyone else in the dorm. They realized that Ho-sok's departure was not just an individual career choice, but an emotional fracture that threatened to tear the soul out of their team. It was at this critical juncture that the leadership of Kim Namjoon, who would later become RM, proved to be the ultimate saving grace. Even before he was officially designated as the leader of BTS, Namjoon possessed an intuitive understanding of the group's dynamics. He knew that while they all had individual talents, their true strength lay in their collective identity. He knew that Hoseok was not merely a member who filled a spot in the lineup, he was the physical anchor of their performance. In a hip-hop influenced group, dance was the primary medium through which they would express their energy, and Hoseok was the undisputed master of that craft. More importantly, Hoseok possessed a unique social intelligence, an ability to read the room and lift the spirits of those around him, a quality that was essential for keeping the peace in a high-pressure environment. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Namjoon went directly to the executives of Big Hit Entertainment. He did not plead for his own career. Instead, he made a direct and uncompromising demand on behalf of the team. Namjoon explained to the management that BTS could not exist without Jung Hoseok. He argued that the chemistry they had built was irreplaceable, and that if they attempted to debut without him, the group would fail before it even started. His conviction was so powerful that it forced the management to reconsider. They agreed that if Namjoon and the others could convince Hoseok to return, they would welcome him back. This set off a series of emotional conversations between the trainees and Hoseok. It was not a corporate negotiation, but an appeal to the brotherhood they had forged in their shared struggles. When Hoseok eventually decided to return, it was not because he suddenly believed the agency had found a magic formula for success, or because he was guaranteed fame. He returned because of a simple, profound realization. He trusted the members. When Hoseok walked back through the door of the dorm, there were no grand speeches or dramatic celebrations. Instead, there was a quiet, profound sense of relief that filled the room. The members simply helped him unpack his bags, and they sat down to share a simple meal, a moment that marked a silent pact between them. In that quiet room, they understood without words that their destinies were now permanently intertwined. They had looked into the abyss of failure and decided that they would rather face it together than succeed apart. This early crisis and the subsequent reconciliation laid the foundation for the unique operational structure of BTS. Upon his return, Hoseok took on the role of the group's dance captain, a position of immense responsibility. He became the bridge between choreographers and the members, translating complex movements into a language they could all understand and demanding perfection in their rehearsals. The level of synchronization that would later define their live performances was born from Hoseok's relentless dedication during those early days. It was after this reconciliation that Hoseok fully embraced the stage name J-Hope. It was not just a marketing concept, but a personal commitment. Having experienced the despair of almost giving up, he made a conscious decision to become the source of light and energy for the group. He understood that to keep the team from falling apart in the future, someone had to carry the banner of optimism, even when circumstances were bleak. This choice required immense emotional labor, as he had to mask his own anxieties and physical exhaustion to maintain the group's spirits, a sacrifice that the other members recognized and deeply appreciated. But the impact of his return went far beyond the stage. It established a cultural norm within the group that would save them time and time again. They learned that no single member was expendable, and that the departure of one would mean the end of all. This understanding created a protective barrier around the group, shielding them from the divisive tactics often employed by the industry. It taught them to resolve their conflicts internally and to view each other as partners in a lifelong endeavor rather than temporary competitors. If Hoseok had boarded that bus back to Gwangju and never returned, the global phenomenon of BTS would have been snuffed out before it ever had a chance to ignite. The history of K-pop would look entirely different, and the millions of fans who found solace in their music would have never heard their songs. This pre-debut rescue was the first major test of their collective will, proving that their bond was stronger than the systemic pressures of the trainee system. But while Hoseok's return restored the group's physical completeness, the stability of this newly reunited team would soon be tested by a different kind of pressure, one that targeted their leader, who had to choose between personal glory and the uncertain future of his brothers.
Number 5. The Solo Temptation RM. The pressure of leadership is often invisible, existing in the quiet moments of decision-making that never make it to the public eye. For Kim Namjoon, known to the world as RM, The burden of steering BTS was present long before they achieved global recognition. In the early years of the group's existence, the K-pop landscape was highly polarized, particularly when it came to the intersection of hip-hop and commercial pop music. South Korea's underground rap scene was notoriously fierce and protective of its authenticity. Rappers who performed in clubs and released independent mixtapes viewed the idol industry with deep contempt, labeling it as a factory of manufactured puppets who had no real artistic voice. Namjoon had been a rising star in that underground scene, performing under the moniker Runch Randa and earning the respect of his peers for his complex wordplay and mature lyricism. When he signed with Big Hit Entertainment, a small and financially precarious agency, he was immediately branded a sellout by the very community that had raised him. This conflict reached a public climax during a live broadcast in 2013, where Namjoon and Suga were openly mocked by an underground rapper who questioned their authenticity, their choice of stage presentation, and their artistic integrity. The incident was a humiliating public trial that laid bare the deep hostility they faced from their former peers. For Namjoon, who had spent his teenage years defining himself through his lyricism, being told that he had abandoned his art for commercial success was a devastating blow. The temptation to prove these critics wrong by releasing a solo album and demonstrating his raw hip-hop credentials was a constant, pressing desire. The industry seemed to be telling him that he was too good for the idol system and that his talent was being wasted in a group that was struggling to find its footing. To make matters more difficult, the original concept of BTS as a pure hip-hop collective was gradually restructured by the agency into a traditional K-pop idol group. This meant that Namjoon, who had never trained in dance, was suddenly required to spend hours mastering synchronized choreography, wearing stage makeup, and performing in pop-oriented concepts that felt completely foreign to his roots. The early years after their debut in 2013 did not bring immediate success. They were ignored by major television networks, ridiculed for their group name, and constantly reminded of their agency's lack of influence. It was in this environment of struggle and uncertainty, around 2014, that the ultimate test of Namjoon's loyalty occurred. The agency's founder, Bang Si-hyuk, set up a scenario that would test the young leader's commitment to its absolute limit. Bang Si-hyuk called Namjoon into his office and presented him with a stark, career-defining choice. The producer pointed out the slow progress of the group, the financial strain on the company, and the obvious friction between Namjoon's underground hip-hop roots and the idol path. He then asked a direct, unfiltered question. Did Namjoon want to abandon the group to pursue a solo career, where he would be given full creative freedom and immediate promotion as a solo artist, or did he want to remain as the leader of BTS? Bang Si-hyuk's query was not merely a hypothetical exercise. He was fully aware of Namjoon's potential as a solo artist. The agency was in such dire financial straits that focusing their limited resources on a single, highly marketable solo rapper was a viable business alternative to funding a 7-member group that had yet to turn a profit. The room was silent, the air heavy with the unspoken reality that the company's future and the lives of the other 6 members hung on Namjoon's reply. For any young artist facing immense criticism, financial hardship, and the exhausting responsibility of leading 6 other struggling trainees, the offer of a solo career was an incredibly tempting escape route. Yet, without a single moment of hesitation, without asking for time to reflect, and without weighing the potential financial advantages, Namjoon gave a one-word answer: BTS. This instantaneous response was not just a testament to his character. It was the moment that sealed the destiny of the group. The other members, who were secretly watching the interaction unfold via a hidden camera setup, were deeply moved by their leader's unwavering conviction. For trainees who were constantly battling their own insecurities and wondering if they were simply drag weight in Namjoon's journey, his decision to tie his fate to theirs was a powerful validation. The ripple effect of Namjoon's decision cannot be overstated, particularly regarding Jungkook. The youngest member had famously rejected offers from several major, established entertainment agencies, choosing Big Hit solely because he had been mesmerized by Namjoon's rapping. For Jungkook, Namjoon was the entire reason he was in Seoul. Had Namjoon decided to walk away to pursue a solo career, the thread holding Jungkook to the company would have snapped instantly, triggering a chain reaction that would have disassembled the group before they could even attempt to establish themselves. As the leader, Namjoon occupied a notoriously difficult position. He was the intermediary between the corporate interests of Big Hit and the personal, often emotional needs of the 6 other members. When the schedule became unbearable, it was Namjoon who had to gather the strength to negotiate with the staff. When the members clashed in the high-stress environment of their shared dorm, it was Namjoon who had to mediate and restore peace. This constant negotiation required a level of emotional maturity that was far beyond his years, forcing him to suppress his own anxieties and fatigue for the sake of the team. He was effectively running a small community of diverse personalities while simultaneously dealing with his own intense schedule. Namjoon's leadership style was never about exerting authority. It was about serving the group. He understood that his primary role was to create a space where the other members could shine, often stepping into the background to allow their unique talents to take center stage. When they began their international expansion, Namjoon took on the grueling task of acting as the group's sole English translator and spokesperson, navigating complex media landscapes with a maturity that protected his members from the pitfalls of sudden global attention. The knowledge that their leader had chosen them over a guaranteed solo path gave the other members the confidence to push through their own physical and mental limitations. It created a culture of mutual respect where individual ambitions were voluntarily aligned with the collective goals of the team. If Namjoon had chosen the solo path that day, the group would have dissolved immediately. He was the core around which the entire project had been built. Without his presence and his lyrical vision, there would have been no foundation to hold the group together. His decision to stay was a declaration that the dream of BTS was worth fighting for, no matter how difficult the journey might be. This act of loyalty established a standard of commitment that each member would emulate in the years to come. It showed them that the true measure of their success would not be found in individual accolades, but in what they could achieve together as a unit. Yet, while Namjoon's leadership kept the structure of the group intact, the physical and emotional survival of the members required a different kind of strength, one that came from the quiet, silent resilience of a member who fought through debilitating physical pain and internal darkness to keep the group's musical engine running. Number 4. The hidden pain, Suga. In the high-pressure world of K-pop, the physical body is an artist's primary tool, and any vulnerability is often viewed as a liability that can end a career before it even begins. For Min Yoongi, known to millions as Suga, the battle to remain a part of BTS was fought in absolute silence, under the crushing weight of physical pain and financial desperation. Yoongi had left his hometown of Daegu with nothing but a passion for music, facing severe disapproval from his family, who viewed his musical ambitions as a reckless pursuit. Before he ever set foot in the capital, Yoongi was already fighting a losing battle against the economics of the music industry in Daegu. Working under the name Gloss, he spent his teenage years arranging beats in a tiny, unheated studio. The local music scene was small and impoverished, and Yoongi was frequently cheated out of his payment by older artists who took advantage of his youth. There were nights when he sat in the studio, wondering if he would ever escape the cycle of producing music for people who did not respect his craft. The decision to audition for Big Hit was a desperate leap of faith, a final attempt to prove to his parents that his passion was not a waste of life. When he arrived in Seoul, he brought this baggage with him, a deep-seated fear of failure and a desperate need to prove his worth. The small allowance provided to trainees was barely enough to survive on, forcing Yoongi to make impossible daily choices between purchasing a basic meal or paying for public transit. If he chose to eat a cheap bowl of noodles, he would have to walk for hours back to the dorm in the freezing cold. Determined to support himself and keep his dream alive, Yoongi took a part-time job as a delivery driver, using a motorcycle to navigate the dangerous streets of Seoul at night. This was done in complete secrecy, as the agency strictly prohibited trainees from working external jobs. One rainy night, the very nightmare he feared became a reality when a car struck his motorcycle at an intersection. The roads were exceptionally greasy from a sudden autumn downpour, and as Yoongi rounded a corner, a vehicle failed to yield, sending him sliding across the wet asphalt. The pain in his shoulder was immediate and blinding, a sickening pop that signaled a severe dislocation. Despite the agony, his survival instinct kicked in. He picked up the scattered food containers, forced his scooter back to life, and completed the delivery before returning to the dorm. He knew that complaining or going to the hospital would expose his illicit employment, resulting in his immediate termination from the program. Terrified of being cut from the lineup, Yoongi stood up, hid the truth of the accident, and claimed he had simply fallen down the stairs. For months, he pushed through agonizing pain during the group's intense, highly athletic dance practices. The physical demands of BTS's early choreography were notoriously brutal, requiring aggressive movements, floor drops, and acrobatics. For Yoongi, whose shoulder labrum was completely torn, each practice session was a form of torture. He would secretly bind his shoulder with tight compression tape and consume maximum doses of painkillers just to make it through the daily evaluations. The constant terror that his shoulder would give out during a live television broadcast, causing him to drop a routine and ruin the group's reputation, was a mental weight that haunted his sleep. He lived in a state of hypervigilance, constantly adjusting his posture to conceal the fact that his left arm had limited range of motion. Eventually, the pain and the financial strain became too heavy to bear. Believing he had reached the end of his rope, Yoongi gathered the courage to confess the truth to Bang Si-hyuk and the members. He expected to be packing his bags that very night. However, what happened next was a complete departure from the ruthless norms of the K-pop industry. Instead of reprimanding or dismissing him, Bang Si-hyuk looked at the young trainee and told him that the company would cover his tuition fees, so he would no longer have to work part-time jobs, and that they would wait for his shoulder to heal. The members rallied around him, offering their support and making it clear that BTS could not exist without Min Yoongi. This unexpected act of humanity and loyalty from the agency and his bandmates re-anchored Yoongi to the group. It transformed his perspective from one of isolated survival to one of shared responsibility. He realized he was not alone in his struggle and that his presence was truly valued. This profound sense of belonging would shape his entire approach to the group's music. Yoongi became the emotional and musical realist of BTS. While other members brought brightness and optimism, Yoongi provided the raw, unvarnished truth through his production and songwriting. He poured his experiences with poverty, the delivery accident, and his struggles with depression and social anxiety into his music, most notably under his solo moniker, August D. His lyrics were not designed to be comfortable, they were designed to be honest. This authenticity became a vital component of BTS's global appeal. In a genre often criticized for being superficial, Yoongi's raw honesty gave the group a unique credibility that resonated deeply with listeners who were fighting their own silent battles. His ability to articulate pain and struggle served as a therapeutic outlet not just for the fans, but for the members themselves. During the group's rise to fame, when the sudden influx of wealth and attention threatened to distort their sense of reality, Yoongi's pragmatism kept them grounded. He was the one who reminded them of where they came from and the sacrifices they had made to get there. His silent resilience during those early years of physical suffering established a culture of endurance within the group. The members knew that if Yoongi could push through his pain for the sake of the team, they too could overcome their individual challenges. The survival of BTS was not just about overcoming external obstacles. It was about creating an environment where weakness was not punished, but supported. Yoongi's story is a testament to the power of that support. By choosing to protect their injured brother rather than replace him, the members and the agency built a foundation of trust that would withstand the immense pressures of their future global stardom. But as the group continued to climb higher, the pressure did not disappear. It simply changed form, migrating from the physical strain of their early days to a deep, emotional exhaustion that would test the vulnerability of the group's most sensitive member. Number 3. The Fragile Mask, V. For an artist whose appeal is built on charisma and expressive performance, the pressure to maintain an engaging public persona can become a psychological prison. Kim Tae-young, known to fans as V, was a free-spirited boy from Gyeochang who had joined the agency almost by accident, following a friend to an audition and ending up being selected himself. He brought a unique, artistic sensibility, and a soulful baritone voice to the group, but his most prominent trait was his emotional transparency. Taehyung was someone who wore his feelings openly, a quality that made him a beloved performer but also left him highly vulnerable to the harsh demands of global stardom. To understand Taehyung's emotional landscape, one must look at his deep roots in Gyeochang, where he was raised by his grandparents. His grandmother was the central anchor of his youth, providing him with unconditional love that he would carry into his career. In late 2016, while BTS was achieving major breakthroughs with the album Wings, Taehyung's grandmother passed away. Because of the group's relentless schedule, he was forced to perform on live television and interact with fans while processing this devastating grief in secret. The cognitive dissonance of having to smile and dance for the cameras while his heart was breaking established a pattern of emotional suppression that would eventually lead to the crisis of 2018. He was carrying the weight of unresolved personal loss alongside the growing demands of global stardom, a combination that began to erode his internal resilience. As BTS's fame escalated between 2017 and 2018, the demands on his physical and mental energy reached unprecedented levels. The boundary between V, the glamorous stage persona, and Taehyung, the quiet young man who valued simplicity, began to blur. By 2018, the scale of BTS's fame had grown to a point where simple human actions were no longer possible for the members. Taehyung, who had always found peace in simple activities like taking photos of street life, visiting public art galleries, and walking in the park, found himself confined to hotel rooms and private vehicles. The constant presence of paparazzi, fans, and security detail created a suffocating environment where his personal freedom was virtually non-existent. This isolation began to alter his personality. The bright, playful boy who had once been known for his eccentricities began to withdraw, presenting a quieter, more guarded version of himself to the world. He felt as though he was living in a gilded cage, where every movement was monitored and every mistake could damage the reputation of the team. The relentless nature of their schedule left him with no time to recharge or process his emotions, draining his spirit. During the production of the group's documentary series, Taehyung would later make a heartbreaking confession that exposed the depth of his burnout during this period. He revealed that he had reached a point of such severe mental and physical exhaustion that he found himself wishing he could get injured, even slightly, just to be granted a single day of rest from the relentless wheel of performances and promotions. The psychological weight of wishing for an injury to escape a schedule is a classic symptom of extreme burnout, a state of mind where the individual feels completely trapped by their obligations. Taehyung's confession that he had entertained such thoughts revealed the dark underbelly of the K-pop success story. It showed that the accolades, the stadium cheers, and the financial rewards were not enough to heal the psychological toll of chronic overwork. He was not looking for fame or fortune. He was looking for a way out, a moment of silence where he could simply exist without the pressure of being a global idol. The realization that his mind had turned to self-harm as the only logical solution to obtain a break was the warning sign that finally forced him to halt and speak to the members. The turning point came when Taehyung decided to drop his guard and share his struggle with his bandmates. During a private, emotional meeting in their dorm, Taehyung broke down and confessed the extent of his despair, admitting that he felt he could no longer continue under such pressure. The members gathered around him, not as business partners, but as brothers who had shared a single room and a single dream for years. When Taehyung wept and confessed his desire to leave, the older members did not offer platitudes about duty or the company's financial stakes. RM, Jin, and Suga spoke from their own experiences of exhaustion, acknowledging that they had also felt the desire to walk away. They assured him that his mental health was far more valuable than any Billboard ranking or record sales. They made a collective agreement that if the schedule was destroying their humanity, they would refuse to cooperate, prioritizing their bond over their careers. They assured him that his value to the group was not measured by his performance on stage, but by his presence as their brother. They made it clear that they would rather slow down their ascent and cancel schedules than lose him. This collective realization was crucial. It shifted the group's focus from achieving external milestones to protecting their internal relationships. Taehyung's willingness to expose his fragility acted as a mirror for the entire group, forcing them to confront the unsustainable pace of their careers. It allowed them to dismantle the expectation of perfection they had placed on themselves. By supporting Taehyung through his darkest hour, the members reinforced the idea that BTS was a safe haven, a place where they could be weak without fear of judgment. This emotional reboot gave Taehyung the strength to continue, knowing that he did not have to wear the mask of V at the cost of his own humanity. It allowed him to find joy in his art again, redefining his relationship with fame and performance. The vulnerability that Taehyung introduced during this period saved the group from a silent, structural collapse by showing them that true strength lay in acknowledging their limits. But while his emotional confession helped the group realign their priorities, navigating the daily grind of their recovery required a constant, grounding presence, a member who acted as the group's emotional glue, quietly bridging the gaps between them and ensuring that no one was left behind in the shadow of their success. Number 2. The emotional anchor, Jimin. In any group built on intense human relationships, there is always one person who operates in the quiet spaces between the chaos, holding people together not through authority or vocal leadership, but through an almost preternatural ability to sense when someone is breaking down before they even realize it themselves. For Park Jimin, the role of being the emotional glue of BTS was never formally assigned. It was an instinctive response to the emotional environment of 7 young men living under one roof, sharing every triumph and every crisis in close proximity. Jimin had arrived at Big Hit Entertainment as a teenager from Busan, a trained contemporary dancer who had no prior rap or vocal training in the idol genre. He was arguably the most technically uncertain of all the members during the trainee period, and this awareness of his own developmental gap in comparison to others created an internal pressure that manifested as a relentless, almost self-destructive work ethic. While other trainees slept, Jimin stayed in the practice room, rehearsing routines until his feet blistered and his body could no longer stand upright. His perfectionism was not born from arrogance, but from a deep fear of being the weakest link in a chain that could break at any moment. This fear became a defining characteristic of his contribution to the group, pushing him to develop a standard of performance excellence that would later become one of BTS's most recognizable hallmarks. However, the personal cost of this relentless drive was steep, and it would eventually surface in a way that nearly destroyed his ability to function as a member of the team. As BTS's global profile expanded dramatically between 2017 and 2018, Jimin's internal pressure escalated in proportion to the scale of their success. He was now performing in front of tens of thousands of people, his every movement captured by multiple high-definition cameras and scrutinized by millions of followers on social media. The same perfectionism that had driven his technical growth during the trainee years began to turn inward with devastating consequences. He became hypercritical of his own appearance, developing an intensely negative body image that led him to severely restrict his food intake in the periods leading up to major performances and public appearances. During the Wings era, a time when the group was performing their most physically demanding choreography to date, Jimin revealed in subsequent interviews and documentary footage that he was surviving on minimal nutrition, sometimes eating only a single meal per day and exercising beyond his physical limit. The irony was brutal. At the very moment he was being celebrated as one of the most compelling performers in the world, he was quietly waging a private war against his own body. The physical symptoms of severe caloric restriction began to manifest during live performances. He experienced dizzy spells in the wings of the stage and lost muscular strength that was critical to executing the athletic elements of their choreography. The members began to notice these signs, particularly the change in his physical appearance and the way he would drift away from group meals with implausible excuses. But Jimin was masterful at deflecting concern, a skill he had developed through years of being the person who absorbed the emotional pain of others. It was deeply paradoxical. The very member who was most acutely attuned to the suffering of others was simultaneously the most resistant to acknowledging his own. The collapse of this defensive barrier happened during a group dinner that the members had insisted on holding in their hotel suite during a tour leg in 2018. It was one of the rare occasions when the entire group was sitting down together without cameras or staff present. Jimin had been quietly pushing food around his plate when RM noticed and held his gaze long enough for Jimin's composure to crack. What followed was a tearful, long overdue conversation in which Jimin finally dismantled the carefully constructed facade he had maintained for years. He confessed that the pressure of being on a global stage had intensified every insecurity he had carried since his trainee days to an unbearable degree, and that he had been harming himself physically in a misguided attempt to feel in control of at least one element of his overwhelmingly complex life. The group's response to his confession was immediate and protective. They did not minimize his experience or redirect the conversation to how his physical well-being was affecting their performances. Instead, each member spoke from their own experience of self-doubt, creating a moment of radical honesty that dissolved the hierarchy of pain that had silently existed between them. It was a conversation that had been years in the making, and its effect on the group dynamic was transformative. The members took it upon themselves to create informal accountability structures, ensuring that Jimin was never eating alone, that someone was always checking on him between schedules, and that his contributions to the group were consistently and explicitly valued. The role that Jimin had played for all the other members, that of quiet emotional surveillance and proactive support, was now being reflected back to him collectively. This marked the emergence of a more sustainable version of Jimin's commitment to the group. Having been rescued from his own internal crisis, he channeled his perfectionism away from self-destruction and toward the elevation of the group's collective performance. He became the standard bearer of their choreography, the member who would signal to the others during a performance when their energy was flagging and who would adjust the group's on-stage emotional temperature with an almost intuitive precision. His sensitivity to emotional dynamics, which had always been his defining characteristic, became a professional asset that directly contributed to the quality of their live performances. Jimin also became the primary mediator during periods of creative friction within the group. The process of writing, producing, and recording music as a 7-member unit with diverse artistic sensibilities was inevitably contentious at times. During studio sessions, when creative disagreements threatened to fracture the collaborative environment, Jimin's presence acted as a de-escalating force. He possessed an exceptional ability to find the emotional core of a disagreement, allowing him to translate the frustration of one member into a language that another could receive without defensiveness. This diplomatic skill was not learned from a management textbook. It was the natural extension of his lifelong habit of prioritizing the emotional comfort of those around him. The fans' profound connection to Jimin went beyond his technical abilities as a dancer and vocalist. They sensed in him a quality of genuine care that transcended the performance itself. When he cried during an awards ceremony, when he reached into the audience to hold a fan's hand, or when he checked on a distressed member on live television, these were not calculated public relations moves. They were the authentic expressions of a person whose primary mode of existing in the world was through deep emotional investment in others. It was this authenticity that created one of the most intense parasocial bonds between a K-pop artist and a global fanbase, making him not just a performer, but a point of genuine emotional connection for millions of people who felt unseen and unheard in their own lives. The broader significance of Jimin's contribution to BTS's survival lies in what he represented as a functional model for the group's emotional infrastructure. Namjoon provided intellectual leadership, Yoongi provided artistic integrity, Jin provided perspective and levity, Hoseok provided energy and optimism, and Taehyung provided emotional honesty. Jimin completed this ecosystem by providing the connective tissue that held all of these distinct personalities together. Without his constant, quiet work of maintaining the group's emotional bonds, the individual pressures that each member faced would have driven them apart long before they could achieve the cohesion that made their performances legendary. The survival of BTS was not the result of one defining moment or one heroic decision. It was the cumulative product of countless quiet acts of solidarity, many of which were orchestrated by the person who understood, better than anyone, the cost of suffering in silence. And yet, As integral as Jimin's emotional work was to the group's survival, the final piece of the puzzle that kept BTS together through every crisis and every moment of doubt belonged to the member who had chosen these six strangers over the guarantee of a future with a far more powerful institution, a choice made at an age when most teenagers are still figuring out what they want for dinner. Number 1. The choice that started everything, Jungkook. There is a particular kind of courage that belongs exclusively to those who are too young to fully understand the weight of the decision they are making. It is a courage that operates on instinct and trust rather than calculated strategy, a leap of faith taken before the rational mind has developed enough to manufacture doubt. In 2011, a 15-year-old boy from Busan named Jungkook walked into an open audition and performed with enough raw talent to turn the heads of some of the most powerful talent scouts in the Korean entertainment industry. By the time that audition concluded, he had received formal offers from no fewer than 7 established entertainment agencies, including titans of the K-pop industry, whose rosters included artists who dominated every chart and every television program in South Korea. These were companies with decades of infrastructure, massive promotional networks, and a proven track record of manufacturing global stars. Any rational advisor with knowledge of the industry would have told the teenager from Busan that accepting any one of these offers was the obvious, logical, and safe choice for his future. Yet Jungkook turned all of them down. He chose instead to sign with Big Hit Entertainment, a small, financially struggling company that had no significant artists on its roster, no major television connections, and a very realistic possibility of going bankrupt within the next fiscal year. This decision, made by a teenager who was barely old enough to navigate Seoul's subway system alone, was the single most consequential choice in the history of BTS. The reason Jungkook made this counterintuitive, industry-defying decision was simple, direct, and entirely human. He had seen Kim Namjoon perform, and he trusted him. During the audition process, Jungkook had the opportunity to observe Namjoon's raw talent and magnetic presence as a rapper, and something in that observation sparked an instinctive conviction that wherever this young man was going, that was the direction worth following. He was not responding to a corporate brand or a financial guarantee. He was responding to a human being whose artistry made him believe that the destination was worth the uncertain road. This act of blind faith by a 15-year-old boy placed the fate of one of the most influential musical groups in modern history on the foundation of a single human connection, and it is a fact that has never lost its power to be extraordinary. Jungkook's arrival at Big Hit fundamentally altered the internal dynamics of the forming group. He was the youngest member by a significant margin, a quality that in Korean social culture carries enormous weight.